Okay, so moving right along, now what we're going to do is look at H3s. So that's what these um, little brighter yellow colored things are, right? And what you'll notice if you look at this is that each article has a different number of H3s. Like this pink article here has 2 H3s. My goals, that article, it has 1 H3, and then miscellaneous has 2 H3s. So, and the other thing you'll want to notice before we start putting them in is that the H3s, they come on the outside of the green, which is the header, right? So it means it's inside the article, but it's outside of the green header. All right, so what we can do here is say, all right, well, it's going to be inside the article, all right, but outside the header. So let's go ahead here and put an H3. All right, and we'll say H3 here. And then I'm just going to copy this. And then remember the first one, it had 2. Okay, so I'll just do a couple of lines of return space, and that way we can kind of see the content a little bit better. And then if you go into the second article, there was just the 1 after the header. And we'll come down here and, okay. And then the last one had 2 H3s. All right, so now we've got our H3s in there, and if you wanted really quickly to jump over to here, you could see that now we've got a bunch of H3s in here. It's not beautiful, but one thing you will notice is that it has a little bit of formatting, okay, so that we can at least see some of the hierarchy. All right, let's jump back over to our document here, and looks like what's next are the paragraphs. And we're just going to leave this header aside right now, alone. We're just going to leave it alone, and we're just going to move on to some of the other contents down here. All right, we'll come back to this though. And you'll see that these kind of orange colored things are paragraphs. So it looks like there's a paragraph immediately under this H3, and this basically under both H3s in the first article. There are no paragraphs in the other 2 articles, but there's also a paragraph down in the footer. So let's do this. Let's go down here, and in the top article, right, we can come down and we'll put a paragraph, and we'll write paragraph text. And then I'll copy this, and then if you were to look at the outline, it goes here too. And then that's just the first article up here, this first pink article that's in the content, I should say. And then the next time we see a paragraph is down in the footer. So if we scroll down to the footer area where it says footer, let's just put paragraph text there, okay? And so now we've got our paragraphs in that we have at least in our outline here. All right, and so the next thing that you could do, there are 1 or 2 things you could do if you wanted to, you know, do this. You could start actually putting content in. Now that we're getting more and more stuff in here, it might start looking kind of confusing just to have all this dummy text in here. It's really up to you. If you wanted to start inserting some of that stuff, you could. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep going through with the outline, and I'm going to insert the actual content later, and you'll see how simple that actually is once the outline's there. Okay, so that means we're going to move on to the next. And you can see that it looks like the next thing we're dealing with are lists, okay, in blue. And so with a list, you've got some different types of lists. You have unordered, ordered, and definition lists. And the first one that we have, if you were to look here kind of closely, it says unordered list thing 1, unordered list thing 2, and so on. All right, so let's go, and it's under this first paragraph, okay? And so what I can do is I can start the unordered list, and it starts off with a tag called UL. All right, and then inside of UL, what you're going to see is that you're supposed to put list items. And so I'm going to nest it. So I've got UL, and then I'm going to tab inside of it here, and I'm going to start with, it's very intuitive, list item is LI. Okay, and then automatically complete your tag. So I'll write list item, and then I'll copy this, and to be efficient, I'll just paste it. So we've got 3 list items here. Now, to be really efficient, I can just copy this whole list, this UL, I can copy it, and the only thing that makes it different for a UL to an ordered list is that it's called OL. So that's going to go underneath this paragraph. And instead of UL, I'll just change that to OL, and you can see the difference in how things render. Okay, and then it looks like we have another unordered list down under the second article. Okay, and the second article is the goals article. All right, so if I wanted to look, it's supposed to go under the H3. So this is our second article right here, right? And I can go ahead underneath the H3 and just paste it, and it's unordered. Now, one of the things that before we get to the definition list down here that you're going to see that's starting to get kind of confusing is which article is which, right? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can go ahead and start giving some IDs to these articles if that's going to be helpful for you. You could also put comments in, all right? So either way, it's fine. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put an ID on this first article, and I will call it about. Okay, so, or I'll call it, yeah, about me or about or something. All right, so we'll say article ID equals about. All right, and see, this is what's referred to as an attribute, and an attribute inside of a tag has to be separated from the tag name or other attributes by a space. Not two spaces, just one space. Two spaces can cause problems. All right, and this attribute is referred to as an ID. And in an ID, you're only supposed to have one ID per page. Well, you can have multiple IDs, but they all have to be unique IDs. Like there can only be one ID called about on a page. So the way that you do it is you'd say attribute, and then with an equal sign, in quotation marks, you would put the value of that attribute. All of this stuff is stuff that got covered in the lecture. So if you are not sure about some of that and you want to go back and review it, feel free to. All right, so that's the first article ID. The second article ID, I can go ahead down here and say ID equals, and then this one is, let's call it goals. Okay, and then the third one looks like it's miscellaneous. So we'll say ID equals, and I'm just going to call it MISC for miss or miscellaneous. And then that might make it a little bit easier as we're trying to fill this content in to see where things are actually supposed to go. All right. So now we have this definition, oops, excuse me. We have this definition list down here. And one of the things about a definition list that you need to know is that they are not the same as ordered or unordered lists. So if I want to put that in, you can see that I've got, it's under my second H3 down here. And the way that you write a definition list is you start off with a DL for definition list. It defines the entire list. Okay, and inside of the list, you're going to have some stuff nested. You're going to have a definition term and then definition data. The definition term is called DT. Okay, and then we'll say term 1, for instance. And then each term is going to have data, but the thing is it's not nested inside of it. That's how it's very, very different in some ways. So the definition data is DD, and we'll say data 1, and it just knows to pair these two things together. And so I'll just copy this, and I'll have, let's just put 2 terms and 2 pieces of data. Okay, so that's the way a definition list would get formatted. Okay, and also let's just take a quick peek. I'm going to jump over to my browser, and you can see the live view here, and it's actually starting to look a little bit more like something, right? And you can see how the definition list looks a little bit different in the way that the browser wants to format it by default. And I want to take a moment just to mention something about that browser formatting. We don't have a style sheet attached to this. We haven't styled it. We haven't told H2s to be bigger than H3s. We haven't told unordered lists to have bullets and ordered lists to have numbers. We haven't told it to do any of these things, right? What it's doing is browsers have what are referred to as the browser style sheet or the agent style sheet. And in the absence of any other rules that would override or overwrite the rules in an agent style sheet, the agent goes ahead and it applies its own style sheet to unformatted basic semantic structure so that there is some sort of structure, so that basically it doesn't look like that gobbledygook that we had earlier when we just pasted that rich text formatted file. We just pasted all the content in here without any kind of tag structure built around it. And it was just like one long string of text, right? Well, the browser doesn't want it to look like that. Imagine it, you know, if you had to read a newspaper and there were no headings, there were no paragraphs, there were no periods, you know, there were no stop gaps that you could see, it would be really hard for you to understand the hierarchy. So that's what a browser does, just as sort of a courtesy for anything that might not be formatted, that's just plain old HTML, right? So that's what you're seeing here, is you're seeing the browser style sheet format. Okay, so let's just keep moving. All right, let's just move right along, and let's look at our document here again. Okay, so now we have this aside up here, see in this sort of light pink, and that's up in the banner area. And by the way, one of the things that we didn't do is we didn't put IDs on the sections. We should go ahead and do that actually. So on this section up here, since we call it banner here, we can call it ID equals banner, like that. And then for this next section, we can say, since it's content, we can say ID equals content. Okay. All right. Now we've got that. We can come down here and let's add this little bit of information for the aside. You'll notice that is after the header, but is inside the article. So again, we're going to go after the header, and we can say aside, and we'll say aside info here. Okay, and then we'll add that later. And what an aside is basically is it's complementary or supplementary information. That's semantically what it sort of indicates to like a screen reader or something, okay? And then the next thing that we'd want to look at down here is this block quote. Anytime you have a quote, you know, a lot of times a really good way to deal with it is to technically use what is referred to as a block quote. That's kind of what it was made for. So if you look, it's in miscellaneous, so we'll find our miss ID, and you'll see that it's under the first H3. So we can come here and we'll say block, and as I start typing, you see that it wants to complete it for me. I can either click it like that, or I could hit the enter key, whatever, okay? And so I'm going to put bunch of block quote text here. Okay. All right, so now we've got our block quote set up. I'm going to save this because I haven't saved it recently. I just did it with a key command, or you could come up here and hit save. And now it looks like we have a pretty good structure. And so I think at this point we'd be ready to start putting our content in. So what I'm going to do is, let's just go ahead and take a peek here. I'm going to pull up that text file. Let's do this. Let's go back in there, and I'm just going to open that rich text file. Okay, and I'm going to sort of make it a little bit smaller so that I can put it side by side with my browser, or excuse me, with my code editor, like this. And if I want, I can close this up so I have more space here. That'll work just fine. There we go. Okay, so let's just start moving stuff over. One thing I want to make a really quick note of is that if you have any kind of special characters, things like quotation marks, true quotation marks, not like this is an inch mark, right? And a single apostrophe, we call it an apostrophe, but like if it's just a single one of these, like a tick mark, it's a foot mark if it's straight up and down. Well, a lot of times if it's straight up and down. If it has like the slant or the curls to it, that is going to be a special character. It has special character encoding. So just be careful, like if you're copying out of a Word document or something that has kind of, you know, like a special formatting, that certain kinds of characters, if you copy them and paste them into the code, they're going to look pretty wonky potentially whenever you go to look at them on the web. So just as a warning, okay?